this border war. Fans called it Moonshine Throwdown. I think that's the best rivalry name, an unofficial name, but the best rivalry name I've come across.
Yeah, unofficial that should become official soon enough.
Embrace it.
5 receivers at Duncan's disposal. Duncan stepping up. Hit! Ball is loose!
Big call here.
Marshall thinks they have it, and the Herd do!
Here's the kickoff from Amaretto Curry to the Hilltoppers, and we are underway, and a fake reverse on the kick return. And here comes Townsend down the left sideline. What a way to start it for Western Kentucky on the road, and it is an opening touchdown return, and just like that, the Hilltoppers strike first.
Justin Rohrwasser to try to win it for Marshall from 53 yards out. It's got the leg. It is good! And the perfect season continues for Justin Rohrwasser.
Goes for 2. Going for the win. Western Kentucky going for the victory. Rolling to his right, quick strike, and they did it! Western Kentucky has ended the perfect season into the hands of Willie McNeil. A shocker here in West Virginia, and it is over for Marshall. They end the regular season 11-1.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. We got a surprise little pop-up type podcast. We're deviating away a little bit from our series of position group breakdowns. We've got a guest this afternoon who's going to give us a little bit of a perspective on the Western Division, since we don't really touch on the West Division of Conference USA a lot. We've got Matthew Bartlett from attheRoost.com with us. Steven's with me for a brief amount of time. We're going to talk a little bit about Rice. We're going to get Matthew's feelings on Western Kentucky and Marshall, since Matthew puts together that awesome Conference USA preview magazine. If you haven't seen it or don't know about it, he'll give you all the details on that in just a little bit, where you can pick up a copy. But I will say before we get into it, it's the best $5 you're going to spend on Conference USA coverage, period. But he'll give you all the details on that in a little bit. But for now, welcome to the show, Matt. Moff and I are glad to have you with us, and we'll see how much fun we can have for the next hour or so.
Hey, thanks, guys. Appreciate the kind words and your help, and I'll throw it back to you. You can't get better Western Kentucky Marshall coverage than you got right here.
Well, we do try. That's for sure. Steven lives in Bowling Green, so he's got his finger on the pulse. Trace is just down the road from Huntington and Hurricane. He's always got his finger on the pulse. I'm kind of the outlier. I'm all the way down near Tampa, Florida, but we bring it together as best we can, and we love having guys on the show. We love having guests that can help our listeners with some information that we don't normally get. And admittedly, we just don't know a lot about the West Division because, let's be frank, it comes into play very little throughout the football season. And really the only game most people care about from the East Division is Conference USA Championship game. That's the only one they care about. Unless one of those crossover games keeps you from competing for the Conference USA title. So let's get into the Conference USA preview. First of all, let's tell the folks where they can pick it up, the idea behind it, how you brought it together. And yes, we have been blessed to be asked to be a part of it for 3 years now, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
We love doing that. And I look forward to getting that email every year to see if we're going to be a part of it again. But yeah, tell the folks where they can get it, how they can find it, and kind of what it's all about. And it's not just you. That's the unique part. It's not just you trying to get all this info. Give the folks a little background on the project.
Well, when I launched the Roost and started covering Conference USA, you go and grab all those preseason magazines, right? And they have 9, 10, 11, 12 pages on Clemson. And then they have this little footnote down in the corner that says Marshall plays on the East Coast too. And I was like, well, that's great, but Marshall has a lot more to Western Kentucky, pick UTEP, whoever you are. And so I just really realized that there was a need for more in-depth Conference USA coverage. So what I did is folks like yourself, plugged in guys and gals across Conference USA that live it and breathe it and are on the beat. And I went and sat down and got the best I could find to talk UTEP with me, to talk FIU, to talk I don't know, North Texas. And so I have 5 pages on every Conference USA team. You go from the stats, the big questions, key players, transfers. I have the last written page on every team section is top guys coming in and out, because at this level, there's so many transfers. So And so pulled that together, some conference picks, games to watch, things like that. And the best part is if you go and grab any national publication magazine, not only are you only getting a page per team, you're getting 5 on this preview, and it's $5 for the entire magazine, not 10, 15, 20. So it's cheap. It's out there for everybody at theroost.com/shop. It's got everything else in there. If you go find me on Twitter at The Roost. Links are everywhere. Pretty easy to find. Yeah,
I think it's such a cool idea, such a cool project that you went out and found guys like Steven and I that really focus on, Steven really focuses on Western Kentucky. Trace really focuses on Marshall. And together I try to bridge the gap and know a little bit about both teams. I can't really keep up with those two guys when it comes to each particular team, but bringing in that knowledge and that passion from each fan base helps you get a better quality project or product from each guy or gal. And to be able to present that to the conference fan bases for $5, I mean, you're right. We love the Phil Steele magazine. We use it as the basis for a lot of our podcast stuff. And, he does a really good job and has been doing it for so long, but I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that we used this preview as well for things that we're not going, like further down the road when we're going to cover teams like Western Kentucky and the FAU game, for example. We're going to look at that and we'll have a better idea of what's going on FAU because it's coming from an FAU fan.
Yeah, and I'll add, I had Phil Steele on my podcast last week exclusively to talk Conference USA. So of the national mags, he does a very good job. And he said he gets to talk all the big names all the time, but getting down to the nitty gritty in the CUSA, he shared some dark horses and some things like that. A Western Kentucky guy actually made that list. So one more plug. You can go listen out at the Roost Pod and get some Phil Steele Conference USA.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I did see the link to that, and I thought, wow, that's pretty neat. Maybe we should be doing stuff like that. But we just get caught up in having so much fun with the three of us that we don't really dive. We really kind of stay in our own lane. But look, let's focus now. Let's shift to the 2020 remnants of the 2020 season. I want to talk about here in a little bit, but 2021 is where it's at. I mean, we've got the fresh mag, we've got all the moves, and you talked about the transfer portal. Kind of surprising that you only had 1 page on Western Kentucky, seeing as how that they have absolutely reimagined the transfer portal as a recruiting tool.
Was it like 3 high school seniors? Was that it?
The class is not big. I mean, they went all in. You can tell that they made wholesale changes and used the portal to the best of their benefit. I mean, they brought guys in from all over the country. And, they lost a few guys too, but by and large, we think they upgraded over just about everybody they lost when at certain positions versus transfers out. Not necessarily maybe from exhaustion of eligibility or things like that, but man, they went at the portal like none other. I mean, it's something like 20 some people or something they brought in. It's an amazing number. So talking about Western Kentucky, Steven's got a ticking time bomb here. He's got to be somewhere. So let's dive right into them. Let's talk about Western Kentucky. What do you like, Matthew, about Western Kentucky this year? The players that have really opened your eyes a little bit, and what do you think they're poised to do?
I mean, it's all about the Bailey Zappi hype train, right? Bringing in Zappi, bringing in the OC, his OC from Houston Baptist, the entire Houston Baptist receiving corps. This is a guy who shredded Conference USA defenses when he was at an FCS school with FCS talent. Now you're giving him FBS talent, and you're plopping into a conference that has some good defenses, but his arm and his talent there, I think he has the potential to be really special.
I knew that was where you're going to go, being a Texas guy, zeroing in on the Texas dudes, but it's not just you. Zappi's making all the lists of one of the top transfers in the country from anywhere. Marshall was on the other side of that coin. They lost Kane Madden, All-American offensive lineman to Notre Dame. But as far as bringing somebody in, Bailey Zappi's like in the top 10 of all these lists you see of impactful transfers coming in and all that kind of stuff. And I want to I don't want to disagree with what you're saying here, but I will say this. You say things like FCS talent coming to an FBS level. Who's to say that these guys weren't FBS level talents anyway that just ended up at FCS schools? You know, I mean, you don't throw 10,000 yards by accident. You know what I mean? So Moff made the point that Houston Baptist played a couple of Conference USA schools last year. They played Texas Tech. I mean, the competition was there on a limited stage. And I know Steve's really, really hype about having Zappe. I've heard some negative things in the past couple of days about them calling them a rental offense because they only get him for a year, and then, you know, Zappe's going to be gone. The eligibility will be exhausted, and we'll have to be back to finding another quarterback. But Steve, come in here for a second before you get out of here and go do dad stuff and, you know, all the important things in life, and talk about what Zappe is going to mean for the Tops this year, and help drive that point home a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be nice to have, you know, at this point in the camp, you know, usually we're not naming a starter till, you know, game week the last few years. You know, they kind of have held that close to best and left it a mystery, and it's kind of been a rotating door figuring out who's going to be the guy. But I think, you know, ever since we hired Kit Lee, brought in the wide receivers, and then Zappe committed, you know, the day after our bowl game, you know, he's the guy. He's got the keys. He's driving the car, and we're going to go as far as his arm and his health would take us. You know, and I've been saying all along, you know, I really wish he would kind of fly in under the radar. I've been saying that I want to be the underdog. I want to be overlooked. But that ship has sailed.
Yeah, and that big red ship has sailed, dude.
It sailed. Yeah, he's getting all the hype, all the publication. And that's great. He definitely has the talent. He definitely will have an opportunity to play at the next level. And hopefully he gets to shine this year. You know, people calling it a rental offense, whatever you call it. I mean, that's kind of the point of the game. When you see an area that needs improving in your team, your program, and last year that was our offense and our scoring, you make upgrades. And, you know, we hired staff, moved staff around, promoted people, and the transfer portal is not going away. That's going to be an every year thing. But I also would like to think that hopefully we can hold on to Kit Lee for more than just a year. And I think that he can use quarterbacks on our roster, guys that we're recruiting, guys that may already be committed, and let them learn the system. You know, this will be a good backup year to sit in the shadows and the wings, and hopefully we keep that ball rolling last year. You know, we saw that when the baton was handed from Dowdy to Mike White. You know, Brom was kind of that quarterback whisperer, right? You know, you can almost plug anybody into his system, and they can be productive as long as they're not shooting themselves in the foot. So it's going to be a lot of fun. You know, Zappe, and he got just so many weapons. You know, we've talked about the weapons ad nauseum, but it's going to be fun, and I think Zappe is going to win a lot of ball games. Maybe not 12-0, but I'd love to see it.
Well, look, we're going to talk about one of those ball games. Unfortunately, we don't know exactly what Western Kentucky is going to look like. We think we have an idea of what Rice will look like based on what we saw them do last year. And a feather to put in your cap, Matthew, by the way, being a Rice guy. Rice has the big accolade. They handed Marshall their first ever home loss at Jones C. Edwards Stadium. I mean, ever. That happened last year. That stadium's been around for, I think, since like 1991. That's a lot of football games to be played and never have been shut out at home, and Rice did it last year. Now, look, my Marshall listeners are going to be really upset about that, and they're going to say, yeah, well, Grant Wells had 5 interceptions, and that's true. But still, they got shut out at home, and it had never happened before. So that's a nice feather to put in your cap. That's an answer to a trivia question for sure.
Yeah, but, I mean, Rice was without their starting quarterback, starting running back, top 7 wide receivers, and their entire secondary. So we'll trade.
The listeners won't see that, but Steven's microphone was muted, and it had like the wow. So he's got, you just gave him some ammunition for the Twitterverse when people start bringing that smoke towards him again. That's been going on for the past day or so. People have been coming at Steve pretty hard. So now he's got a laundry list of players that were out for Rice to throw on top of that game. We have no idea really what Western Kentucky is going to look like. Like I said, the game Western Kentucky at Rice is way towards the latter fourth of the season. It's all the way in November, and it's right smack dab in the middle of Western's toughest 4-game conference stretch. So, and it's the Western crossover game, like the Western Division crossover game. That rough stretch starts for Western Kentucky with a rivalry game against Middle Tennessee, the 100 Miles of Hate, MBGKY. Then they go to play Rice the following week. Then it's the gauntlet of FAU at home and finishing at Marshall on 11/27 for the Moonshine Throwdown, a game that we feel could determine the Eastern Division. Rice is kind of poised to be that thorn in the side of that East Division run. Middle, you got to think, okay, that's one they can get at home. It's a rivalry game. It's home. They always play each other tight, but Western, we believe, is far and away better than Middle Tennessee this year. FAU is going to be a tough one, but they do get them at home. And then, of course, Marshall and Western Kentucky is always tough. So what will we get when we see Rice and Western lock horns? That's an interesting question. All the way in Texas, Rice comes off the positive season last year, 2 years ago when Marshall played Rice down in Texas. Trace came away from that game saying this is not a 2-win ball club or a 3-win ball club, whatever they were a couple of years ago. He said they're much improved. And that turned out to be a correct assessment. Rice was much better last year. Like I said, they handed Marshall that big loss at home. And now we look forward to 2021. Is this an even more improved Rice? Do you see a little bit of a step back in areas, or is it, nope, it's all steam ahead? This is a better Rice than a year ago. What is it, Matt?
So, like I mentioned in the Marshall game, the starting corner that Rice charted out against Marshall was 7th on the depth chart at the end of spring practice. They lost their entire cornerback room. Their starting safety that they trotted out would have been 5th at the end of spring practice. They literally lost everyone. So Blaze Aldridge is the only guy who's not back this year. He moved up and made the jump to the SEC, playing for Missouri this year. So the defense is going to be just as good as it was last year, if not better. And as Marshall fans can attest, that was the problem. So they've got that covered. They also, by the time they were practicing for the UAB game at the end of the season, they had one scholarship wide receiver available to practice, and he was hurt. So they bring back Bradley Rosner, who was an all-conference guy in 2019, and lots of other pieces there. And then it all comes down ultimately to quarterback, and that's kind of the story we're spinning to some degree with Western Kentucky, right? If you have the right guy pushing the buttons, all of a sudden a bad offense becomes a good offense, and a good offense becomes a great offense. And Rice brought in Luke McCaffrey, formerly of Nebraska, blue chip guy, one of the highest rated signees in program history for Rice. If he can click, then you got to think it's interesting. And then maybe we can have a McCaffrey-Zappy shootout. That's something no one would have seen coming 6 months ago.
Yeah. Rice for me is, I hate to use the term dark horse, but they are, because when I think of the West, and I think when a lot of people think of the West, it's UAB and kind of everybody else, and who will rise out of that next group of players or teams. I think the feeling around the conference, at least from the Eastern side, or at least from the Marshall fan bases and Western fan bases, is it's UAB's division to lose. So somebody's going to have to trip them up. And even if it's for no other reason than they've just been really good for a couple of years and didn't really take a huge step back, so that everybody kind of expects UAB to be good again. A lot of folks think UTSA will be right there kind of with them, but there's still a little bit of separation. And then you have teams like Louisiana Tech, Southern Miss, North Texas, and Rice kind of all lumped together to see who can rise out of there. And maybe if you can, catch UTSA on the right Saturday or catch UAB on the right Saturday and get that head-to-head win, that might be enough to push you in the conference as a title game. But where do you think ultimately, when I always like to say, when the dust settles and you come up for air, where do you think Rice will finish in the West?
Well, can I turn this around and ask you a question?
Yeah, for
because
sure.
I think this is interesting, because I think the sentiment that you said is right. If you ask anybody that covers Conference USA, who's kind of like your dark horse team in the West, not UAB, but somebody that could surprise people and win a lot of games, everybody says Rice.
Yeah.
And that's not Homer talk. I hear that as we don't think they can win it all, but man, they're going to be really good, better than the 2 wins or whatever they get projected in every publication. So, what's the difference in your mind between, if it's a consensus that Rice is a dark horse to do better than what, 5th or 6th or wherever they're being picked, then why is nobody putting Rice, we'll say 3rd behind UTSA UAB?
Because I just feel like it's that second lump of teams is just, it's a coin flip between all, and it boils down to this game versus that game and who will win this versus that. I can't run down the West Division and go, oh, the pecking order is this, and this. It feels like, okay, UAB is number 1. UTSA is right there and could compete if they beat UAB head to head. They'll go to the title game, and then it's who will rise out of that next group of 4 teams that I mentioned before.
And I think you're right. 3 through 6.
It's a lot like
close.
the East. We feel like that in the East. It's usually Western, FAU, and Marshall vying for that top spot, and it's who can beat who and who can ruin the other one's season to see who will come out of the East Division. It's a lot like, Charlotte. Charlotte can win some games and they'll ruin a season, but we don't think they'll go to the conference title game. We don't think they're that good to win enough beat enough of the top tier East Division teams to go to the conference title game. And we feel like that with Rice and North Texas, like they might beat each other and knock the other one out of contention. And one of them might clip UTSA and kind of give them a hurdle to leap over, but they're all right there. And it's just going to come down to who can win on any given Saturday. It's because they're so close. It's who will be injured that week versus who's available that week. And it's just too close to call. I like Rice to be way better than 2 wins. Way better than 2 wins.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that's kind of where I'm coming at. I think the expectation at Rice is a bowl game, and that's something that the talent this team has. They've been a quarterback away, and we saw Mike Collins was, I think he was top 5 in the country. He was one of like 6 quarterbacks that had 10 touchdowns and 1 or 2 or fewer interceptions to start the season, and then he got hurt last year. And we saw a Rice offense that was putting up 30, 40 points a game, which was scary when you have a defense that can shut out Marshall. So I think that's going to be key, but this is a team that, they open up with UTSA and UAB, and that's going to be probably their 2 toughest conference games. But after that, North Texas, Charlotte, Western's going to be interesting, UTEP and Louisiana Tech. You're looking at a game where Rice will be at worst a coin flip in all of those. And if McCaffrey, that's the $1 million question, right? If McCaffrey pans out and they get the quarterback they've been seeking, all of a sudden Rice is going to be favored a lot of those games at the end of the season coming at home. So I think you're looking at a team that probably has a floor of like 500 in conference. And then, throw in those toss-up games. Can they beat Western? Can they pull one over against UTSA? They were 2 bad plays against UAB last year from a deadlock game. So they've been close. Everyone's asking, is this the year they break through? We'll see.
Yeah. Well, we've got Steven here, and I want to get Steven's opinion before we lose him. So hopefully he's, the video looks a little shaky. I hope the audio comes through okay, Steve. We'll have to see what it sounds like. I hate to have to cut that short if we can't get you. But what do you feel about Rice? You and I are usually like-minded when we assess these things. What do you feel about Rice as a Western Division contender and in the pecking order?
Well, I think kind of the answer to the question that Matt kind of bounced to you, why aren't they discussed in higher regard? I think a lot of it has to do with a little bit of program perception. It hasn't been a terribly long time since they won the conference, but then there's kind of been a lull of not as much success as they'd like to see. Now, hearing some things that he was talking about, being down a lot of starters, bringing back a lot of people, and just, hearing about the quarterback situation. I really think maybe they're a year away from being in the chatter that he's talking about today. It's kind of nice. They're kind of, sounds like they're in the role that I wish Western was in. I wish Western was coming in as that unexpected underdog. Just going to be a rollover game, and then they turn around and put 30 upon you in the first half. That's what I want to see Western doing. It sounds like Rice has that potential. When you bring back that much experience, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and then you've got some offensive playmakers, it sounds like they could be dangerous. And if it's not this year, if we're talking about those coin flip games, if they're only winning half of those, you got to think that takes up nicely for going into next year, especially. I'm not trying to overlook this year, but just kind of thinking big picture, long term down the road. Like it sounds like their program is heading in the right direction.
Yeah, and I'll drop in this little nugget right here that's interesting. So because of COVID and because of a redshirt year, Luke McCaffrey has 4 years of eligibility remaining, which Rice hasn't had a quarterback start back-to-back season openers since 2014. So it's been a bit. So there's that. And then 3 of the top 5 recruiting classes in program history have been signed in the past 3 years by Mike Bloomgren. So the talent level is there and it's coming. And who knows, this year, next year. But yeah, I think they have the benefit of not having done it yet. That is allowing them to fly under the radar a bit.
Yeah, and that's also the main driver of why folks aren't like Rice can win this division, because they haven't done it yet. You nailed it on the head. If they were finishing second in the West, for the past couple of years, and they're just right there, even though you're a play here and a play there away from being second in the league, you end up third or fourth in the league, just by the way it shakes out. That's the difference. That's really the difference. Now, I will say this, and this is a little bit of devil's advocate maybe and tongue-in-cheek type stuff. If McCaffrey had some marked success at his previous stop, and then he comes to Rice, maybe the hype train is a little bit higher. If Bailey Zappi comes to Rice instead of Western Kentucky, the hype train might be off the rails, because he's a highly productive passer and Western Kentucky's getting all that hype. So if he stays in Texas and goes to Rice, maybe you get that.
Here's my fun. This is probably my fun fact for Luke McCaffrey that I think is super interesting. Everybody looks at him and they say he's a running quarterback. Like he can kind of throw, but he's going to run the ball. And that's true. But if you dropped Luke McCaffrey's career completion percentage in Conference USA last year, any idea out of the 14 starting quarterbacks where that would have ranked?
Well, I'm assuming he's going to be first. If that's
first. I'm not stumping and saying that he's going to be great, but I think him and Zappi, there's a ton of Power 5 transfers at quarterback in Conference USA. Yep. Him and Zappi are arguably the only ones that have actually been productive in college. And for Zappi, he's making a jump up a level. McCaffrey is going down. So that's what I think makes it interesting. And again, I'm not going out and saying he's going to be great, but I think if you have your wish list of things that you would like, a good completion percentage, athletic ability, and playing against easier competition, he checks a lot of those boxes.
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather have a guy complete passes than not.
Which Rice has been like right around 50% for the past 4 years. It's been bad.
Throwing them to the opposite team, which is, but that's a whole separate argument. Let's switch gears now, and we'll talk about Marshall. We're really high on Marshall. We think they're going to be a good team. Let me think. Let me stop before I get into the herd. I was glancing at the schedule while we were talking about how good Rice could be, and I noticed that you go to UTSA and to UAB in back-to-back weeks.
Yeah, not very forgiving.
How's this? I mean, if that's not your success in a nutshell right there, I mean, if you go 2-0 in those weeks, it's pretty high likelihood that you're going to be among the contenders in the West. So
yeah, and I mean, they open up, they get Arkansas and Texas in the first couple weeks. So you could see a very improved Rice team that loses to Arkansas, Texas, UAB, and UTSA and starts the season. Houston's probably a coin flip to start the season 1-5.
Yeah.
And be a lot better than 1-5. So conversely, you win 2 of those games, you beat Houston in a coin flip, and you're looking at 4-2 with your only losses coming to SEC teams.
Yeah, with hype train building. So
yeah.
All of a sudden, a lot of in conference games are looking a little bit more daunting for opposition, but that remains to be seen. But I will say that I am higher on Rice than I was a year ago, and I'm way higher on them than I was 2 years ago. But now it's time.
Last year, my last thing is last year I wouldn't have said that they were capable of finishing top 2. I thought their ceiling last year was probably like maybe third or fourth, like 500, middle of conference. That's what I would have said. This year, I no rose glasses. I really do think they have all the missing pieces in the quarterback. So this is a team that can make that jump into the tier of whoever is a step behind UAB.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think anybody thinks they'll be bad at all. Nobody thinks they'll be a bad team. And even more people think, well, like you said, they'll be a 500 team, but I think they'll be slightly above. I think you're staring at an 8-win team, maybe, definitely looking at a bowl game, and in contention. If a few Saturdays go their way, you can sneak into a conference title game. It just depends.
Go meet Marshall.
Yeah. Well, that remains to be seen as well. The Herd, as we transition to the Herd, they backed into the Conference USA title game last year by canceling the final week of the season against Charlotte. They may or may not have won that game. The Herd was definitely trending downward after the Rice game. They ended the season on a 3-game skid, losing to Rice, losing to UAB at home in a conference title game, and then losing a bowl game, which is something that Marshall rarely does. But they backed into the conference title game by canceling that game with Charlotte for COVID protocols, obviously. But a lot of folks were like, yeah, they should play that game if they can, and they chose not to, and it ultimately allowed them to get into the CUSA Conference Championship game. So we'll see if, we don't know if they would have won that game or would have lost that game. We don't know. But Charlotte has not been friendly to the Herd. They've been the thorn in their side for some reason, which nobody in Huntington can figure out, but they have been. Speaking of Marshall, who is it you like this year? Who's on your radar for sure?
Man, it's tough because you can't really go wrong as far as their roster. I'm really interested to see what Grant Wells does. I think he's going to be certainly an X factor. He was kind of a guy that wasn't supposed to be the next guy, and then had the starting job thrust upon him. When did the previous starter transfer? It was like July or something a year ago, something like that, right?
I honestly, I couldn't remember. I don't know.
It was late in the season. It was after spring. It's like, okay, this guy's the guy. So I think that's going to be really interesting. They have a lot of interesting playmakers. I think Xavier Gaines at tight end is one of those guys that he might not put up like the flashy stats, and people sleep on him, but he's probably the best tight end in the conference. I don't think that's too crazy. And then they have some talent on the outside at wide receiver. I think this offense has enough pieces to be dangerous if they can get all the pieces put together. But I think for Marshall, it's no secret it's going to come down to that defense. And if they can fill the hole left by Tavante Beckett, who very underappreciated linebacker in this conference, and they can maybe run in a similar vein to Rice with let's have elite defense and get enough shots on offense to make it count.
Yeah, that's kind of where Marshall's bread and butter has been the past few seasons. They've relied heavily on lockdown, shutdown defense, and just hoping that they can make enough plays at the end of the game to be ahead on the scoreboard. And by and large, it's worked. It hasn't brought them a championship, but it's kept them in contention to get one. But there's always been that late season head-scratching loss, namely to Charlotte, that keeps them from getting into the conference title game. Or in the case of last year, they made it, and then we don't know what the heck happened. I mean, Grant Wells doesn't complete a pass the entire first half of the conference title game. What? You have an all-timer at running back, and you don't use him as much. I mean, we said in our preview to that game that this was going to be the Brendan Knox, Spencer Brown showdown. It was going to be, which ball carrier gets more carries and can ground out more yards. And UAB went with that approach, and it worked, and they won. And Marshall didn't. They kept trying to pass, run, punt. And, well, they didn't try to. That's what they had to do because it was incompletion, 3-yard gain, punt. And that's how it went. So you can't play an entire half doing basically nothing and then hope to win. But I digress. That is 2020. So now you can see we closed 2020 for the Herd with the first ever home shutout loss against Rice, followed up by the first ever home conference title game loss, and then a bowl game loss, which has only happened 3 times in Marshall's history. So 3 milestone losses in consecutive games to close out 2020. And Herd fans were ready for the change that came, and in comes Charles Huff. And in comes this new attitude. In comes a completely revamped coaching staff with the exception of offensive coordinator Tim Cramsey. It's the only holdover. And now we got to see what we got in the herd. You're right. They returned a ton of playmakers, but they lost a ton. A lot of all-time type guys. Devontae Beckett, all-timer, gone. Darius Hodge, great pass rushing defensive end, gone. A couple of offensive linemen, one to the NFL, one grad transfer, All-American, both gone. Brendan Knox, all-timer at running back, gone. So there are a lot of weapons gone. Here's the interesting thing to me. Last year's wide receiver core didn't do a phenomenal job, and two guys left. Arguably the biggest threat in Brock Thompson left to go to Purdue. And Artie Henry, a productive wide receiver, a nice over-the-middle threat type guy, transferred out and is at UVA now. And still, in this Phil Steele publication, ranks Marshall's wide receiver core number 1. And I can't figure that out because this is all on like projected. I don't know what it's on because Brock Thompson was a huge weapon and he's gone. Artie Henry was highly productive and he's gone. Corey Gamage is still there. Xavier Gaines is still there. Willie Johnson's been there since like the Roosevelt administration and he's still there. So we'll see what we get. Luckily, Marshall doesn't have Rice. They don't have that trip to Texas. They did that 2 years ago. So we'll see kind of where that goes. But I think you're right. I think it's how well does Grant Wells do in year 2 as a starter with the same offensive coordinator? Will the reins get taken off more? And we have been very vocal in saying that Xavier Gaines is the toughest matchup in Conference USA. What are you going to do? You're going to put a linebacker on him that can't run with him. You're going to put a DB on him that he can out-body for the ball. He's proven to be a known entity for a number of years, and I think you're right. He's just the tops in tight ends as far as tight ends go in Conference USA.
Yeah, and you're going down the list, and it's interesting because you mentioned Rice being at the bottom of the perception in the West because they haven't done it before. Marshall's at the top of the East, and I think we're seeing the reverse effect because if you go down and you go down that list you just said, you have a quarterback that kind of ended on a really bad streak and hadn't really earned enough cachet to know if he's good or not. We think he's good, but he's unproven. You have program record-setting end of the season on the negative side. You have a coaching change. You have an entirely brand new coaching staff. You're losing your best players on the offensive line. You lost a lot of talent on both sides of the ball. If you take the name Marshall off the jersey, why is this team picked to win the East? To play devil's advocate,
because for the opposite reason that Rice isn't, because they're always in the hunt. So they do have a little bit of, man, we can't count them out because they're always there. They're really never like worse than third. Even when they're bad, they're not really worse than third. And they were terrible in 2016. I mean, it was a bad year, and they benefited from having other teams that were worse. That was
which usually will happen in Conference USA.
Yeah, they were just worse. So, but a couple of talking points. I gotta protect some. Not protect them, but I gotta bring back to the ground a little bit from what you said. You lost your best players on the offensive line. They absolutely did not. They lost 2 great offensive linemen, but they retained 3 others that are amazingly great offensive linemen. So the unit
I see that the line still has a lot of good pieces.
The unit was broken up. And we say this a lot. Anytime you lose an All-American I don't care if it's an All-American punter, long snapper, holder, whatever, it's going to sting because you're an All-American for a reason. You're really good to be named All-American. And then you lose another guy that goes to the NFL. Well, you don't go to the NFL if you're scrubby. You got to be good. But, the other 3 guys that chose to come back and play that extra year of eligibility, Will Ulmer, Millette, and Sagero, they're great offensive linemen. They've played a lot of ball together. So the line for Marshall will still be very, very, very strong. It's going to be a real strength, if not the real strength for the herd once again. But look, one of the fun topics we get to talk about when that coming out of your area of the world, Texas, Oklahoma-ish, has thrown Conference USA into a whirlwind again. And anytime that happens, we love talking about realignment. And I want to talk about realignment specifically with you because you're a West Division-based fan. You're a Texas-based fan. And a lot of the argument, a lot of the toxicity, let's call it, that comes out of Conference USA East circles when you talk about realignment is the old, we don't need to be sending our volleyball team to UTEP on a Wednesday night for a match. we got no business being in Texas playing, tennis. And I kind of agree with that. There's no need for a team from Norfolk. Well, I understand, but you still got to go. Right? Geographically, it's closer for Huntington and Bowling Green to go to Fargo, North Dakota than it is, or what is it, North Dakota or South, whatever, one of those Dakotas, Fargo, than it is to go to UTEP. So we're spread out. We really are Conference US freaking A. I mean, if we just want to bring in Hawaii, we'll just go ahead and span the globe. But let's talk realignment. I told you when we were messaging before this that a lot of what we talk about is filtered through East Coast lenses. They all want to do what's best for their specific team, and they don't really want to give a regional or a East Coast type thought process to it. It's like, well, this is who I want in my conference because it'd be great for Marshall or it'd be great for Western Kentucky, and it's just not really feasible. It's not like, well, it's the SEC West and Marshall. Well, that's not going to happen, obviously. So let's get realistic here, and let's talk about realignment from your vantage point, from a Texas-based and a West Division-based vantage point. What needs to happen in your eyes? What do you think would be best? Do you think you need to be going to Norfolk to play a soccer match?
Well, I think best in what what is likely to happen might be two different things, and I think it's really interesting to the move to the SEC with Oklahoma and Texas really demonstrates one thing, that in college football there are haves and have-nots, and the power brokers in this sport control what happens. And the reason that Oklahoma and Texas can say we're going to pop up and move to the SEC is because their brand and the dollar value they bring on TV is bigger. Texas has been irrelevant for a decade, and they can still carry their weight and say we're going to show up. You look at teams like UAB that has arguably been one of the 5 best group of 5 teams in the past 5 years, and they don't have a shot at joining a big conference because they don't have the brand value. And I'm sorry, UAB fans, but that's just kind of how it is. What's interesting for Conference USA is their TV deal is bad. The money that they're bringing in on that piece is just, it's not good, and it's scattered. I don't know how, if you want to go find a Conference USA game on TV any particular weekend, is it on CBS Sports Net? Is it on FS2? Is it on Stadium, which technically means I can only watch it on my phone, not my computer? Like, I can't get it over linear TV. It's just confusing. And so I think the reality for Conference USA is somebody might get really, really lucky and get that invitation that they're clamoring for from someone that says, hey, we need a 14th or something, or for whatever reason, we want to bring you in. But more likely than not, you're looking at like Conference USA, the MAC, the Sun Belt as the folks that are the contingency plans for everybody else. So their leagues will probably continue to go on as they can until something, inertia stops them.
So here's the unique thing in regards to some of these G5 conferences. The MAC is the MAC. They are not interested in putting ripples in the pool. They don't want to be hanging out. They want to do their thing. They like to stay in their lane, and they're going to be what they are. They like Maction, whatever. If they enjoy playing on Tuesday night, fine.
I don't know if they like Maction. I think that the money works out for them to like Maction.
And to me, I will never understand that is alienating your fan base year in and year out. How many people can go to a Tuesday night game? Not very many, because they all have work Wednesday. So you're not going to travel in for a Tuesday night game. It's a sham. So whenever people say, oh, we just need to go back to the MAC as far as Marshall goes, think that through for a second. They don't play Saturday games once they get, they do, but they play a lot of Tuesday games, and you don't want that. There's no amount of money worth that.
No.
Like the experience for a small school like our schools is your passion that goes with that school. You want to be able to go watch them. You want to be able to go see them 6 Saturdays a year. That's the payoff for putting up with being the smaller school, is being close to the program and being a part of that. And you were talking about UAB. Yeah, they're a great program in Conference USA, but the number of maroon Roll Tide shirts to UAB shirts in Birmingham is probably staggering in favor of the Tide. It's like that a lot. Stephen will tell you Bowling Green does a great job of capturing the Western Kentucky market. They really do. But outside of that, too far, you're into Louisville country, UK country. You get too far down, you're into Nashville, and now you're in Vandy country and places like that. So, we as smaller schools, I mean, geez, how many schools are in Dallas? You're sharing your city with how many other schools? And
start differentiating. North
right.
Texas is not in Dallas; they're in Denton.
But still,
which is Dallas.
But still, I mean, other school or other. How many are in Dallas? Like,
no, it's got to be 8 to 10, maybe.
Yeah, say in the SMU in Dallas or whatever.
SMU, TCU.
So you have to start, particularly in Texas, you have to start fighting within your own city. That's not something that we have to do. Huntington's got, it's a one-horse town. It's the herd or nothing, or high schools. But, and Bowling Green's the same way. It's Western Kentucky or the high schools. So you only got one college to support if you live there. So when you talk about realignment, I'm always a fan for G5, which is obviously a term I hate, but smaller smaller schools, not the blue bloods, what you call the have-nots, being in a regional conference, somewhere you can make a day trip to and see a game. And that will keep the stands packed. You can maintain regional rivalries, so you interact with people maybe at work that went to this other school that you're playing this Saturday that you can talk crap to, in the hallways. That's what it's all about for us. So,
and I think that the happy medium, maybe it'll be the unhappy medium, but this is something that I don't know if I've heard talked about a lot that I think really could be something that gets considered. And it kind of started the conversation last year when COVID hit, but I think that there could be a fracturing between college football and particularly the Olympic sports, but the rest of collegiate sports. It makes, like, you can make a TV contract work where it makes sense for Marshall to fly to Houston to play Rice, or Rice to fly to Bowling Green, or what have you. Like, you can spin that to where the dollars make sense, that it works. You can't do that for volleyball. Like Western Kentucky and Rice volleyball, that's been fun the past couple of years. Two really great programs. But I think it could be interesting if you take the model that you have for football. Maybe there's tweaks, maybe people move around conference wise, but then you just split it and say, all right, we do football this way, we do everything else this way. For soccer, Rice is going out and playing, the local schools. Maybe you stick Louisiana Tech, you take Texas A&M, maybe Arkansas, anybody you can drive to within like 6-7 hours. And you say, okay, for the non-revenue, so to speak, sports, that's where you draw the line and say, our tennis teams don't need to be flying to a tournament in North Dakota. Like, they can just go to College Station. Like, that makes sense. Marshall playing over there on the East Coast, you got NC State, Duke, West Virginia, it doesn't even have to be, you can go James Madison, anybody in that general area. It makes a lot more sense for those. And honestly, even for West Virginia fans, I know that's the big in-state comparison for Marshall, right? If you said, all right, we're going to be playing y'all in, basketball and whatever every year, there's a lot more hate. Like, West Virginia would hate so much to lose to Marshall more than they would hate to lose to anybody in the Big 12 and any other sport. Like, the interest in a West Virginia Marshall game is going to be so much more than West Virginia Kansas State or Marshall FIU.
Well, yes, yes. And I get what you're saying there. And they used to play basketball annually. They would not play home and homes on, at the schools. West Virginia would not come to Huntington at all. So they would say, well, we're going to play in a neutral site gym in Charleston. It's centrally located and everybody, yada, yada, yada. The bottom line is they didn't want to come to the Cam Henderson Center because they've been beaten several times by the herd on a neutral floor and they hated it. But you're talking about soccer. If you look at Conference USA soccer, I think it might surprise you at some of the teams that are in Conference USA for soccer.
Uh-huh.
Some SEC football schools
Kentucky
play soccer. Yeah, South Carolina, and now recently moved over. Aforementioned West Virginia moves over to play
who
soccer.
Rice beat in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, so this happens in other sports already. So football kind of is
not that crazy.
It is its little animal. Basketball, I feel basketball, the drivers are always going to be football, then men's basketball. It just is. So, if you want to pair those together and do, contract specifics for those two sports, okay, I get that. But regionally, look, if it's a wholesale thing, if it's not what we're talking about, you're picking and choosing a couple of revenue sports to do something different with. If it's a wholesale thing and you're reimagining the conferences, how does it work best for, the West Division of Conference USA, which admittedly just about nobody in the East Division of Conference USA wants to be in a conference with, not because of the quality of teams per se, but because half of those are in Texas. Yeah, there's no connection. So what works best for the Texas-based teams in Conference USA? What would a reimagining of the conference be like to benefit you the best?
I think if you just got a blank slate and you said, all right, you're in charge, this is what you can set it up how you want, within reason. I think the only thing that makes sense is splitting the Sun Belt and Conference USA, which I think has been, this is clearly what's going to happen because it makes sense for since the last round of realignment in 2011, right? So I think geographically and, you can, there's going to be a lot more overlap between your app states and your marshals than anybody in the West. So I think logistically it makes the most sense. I guess you need lawyers to come together and TV contracts to get close to expiring on how that makes sense. The problem is it's not ever going to regionalize that way. It's going to be, if you gave all 28 of those schools free agency and you said pick your conference makes, the guys with the biggest piggy banks are all going to conglomerate, and it's going to be the upper tier of CUSA Sunbelt and the lower tier on money and prestige. But I think if you could draw a line, man, it'd be a lot more interesting playing Louisiana Tech, Troy for Rice, just because it's a shorter drive, drivable at least, than getting down to Boca Raton. Yeah. So I think that would be fun. And then, whatever happens from the Big 12, West Virginia is not popping down to Conference USA, but if you could put more West Virginia Marshall games, that would be fun. Adding Baylor into the mix with some of the West Division schools, that would be a lot of fun. I think it'd be interesting. I think that's kind of the best case scenario you're looking at. I don't know. I'm pessimistic we ever get there, but that's kind of how I would draw it up.
I don't know that it will happen soon. I think things will happen later versus sooner, obviously, but the current lineup that we've got going on isn't sustainable when you talk about the revenue that we receive from our media deal. It's not attractive. That's why we're not getting any money. Nobody wants to see it, obviously. So these media giants don't think there's any reason to pay you to see it because, they don't feel like, well, nobody wants to watch that. We'll put you on a streaming service that you have to pay extra for on top of our cable service to be able to watch. So,
well, CSA signed I think it was 2 years ago, they signed that 5-year deal with the NFL Network or something like that. And then mysteriously the NFL Network disappeared.
Yeah.
So
I don't
have any inside information on how that happened, but it wouldn't shock me if the NFL Network said, nah, man, we're good.
We're good. Yeah. I mean,
we'll show reruns of the combine.
And yeah. So we're back to talking about, the premier games in Conference USA. A Florida Atlantic Marshall comes to mind. It's always been a game that means something in the standings. And the game this year is on Facebook. One of your marquee games in the conference this year is on Facebook. That in and of itself is enough to tell you we need something different. Now, there's a common school of thought around folks that I talk to and, that read and try to stay abreast on the rumor mill and all that kind of stuff that, a few of the Conference USA teams may end up going to the WACs. They may end up going to the Mountain West because they feel like Boise may end up in a new reincantation of the Big 12 and, just all that kind of stuff that could happen out West. And we also feel like the American will get brought in a little bit to a revamped Big 12, if it's called the Big 12, a revamped conference. And that will in turn cause a few Conference USA schools to be in a new, shakeup of a version of the AAC, which leaves us with the Sun Belt and the Conference USA again to form something. So the trickle down effect it's going to happen. Texas and Oklahoma don't leave the Big 12 without its two biggest power players, and then they do nothing. I think
we said that last time, and when A&M and Missouri left, like surely they're not just going to sit on their hands and watch, and then that's exactly what they did. So.
Yeah, but A&M and Missouri ain't Texas and Oklahoma.
It's true, but it's interesting from the Big 12 perspective because it's the same logic as the SEC, right? The SEC said, yeah, we'll take Texas and Oklahoma because Texas and Oklahoma, if you add their revenue to our pie, it makes all of us make more money. There ain't no school in the AAC that you're going to add to the Big 12, and the Big 12 members are going to say, yeah, if we add Houston, everyone's going to get more money. No, if you add another school, you're going to lose money. So it is, I know it's not like the most interesting take, but from a money perspective, the Big 12 might be better off saying, we're going to stick at 8 teams. We're going to have a much smaller check, but we're still going to be better off, maybe contract a schedule alliance with the Pac-12 people are talking about. We're still going to be better off with 8 than adding somebody else or 2 other schools and taking that smaller pie and cutting it up. So there's a real world. I'm preparing, I know realignment is the fun off-season topic, but I'm preparing everyone for, hey, if the Big 12 stays at 8 for the next 5 more years, just because, would not shock me.
I wonder about these power players then looking and saying, hey, you guys only have 8 teams. We can't extend you an auto bid to the playoff for your highest ranked conference champion because we have to rise out of a field of 16. You have to rise out of a field of 8. Competitively, it's not fair, so you have things like that because it's always a power grab. It's always a money grab for teams like the Big 10 and the SEC. And if they can capture an extra playoff spot, then they're going to do that. But what I would really be more inclined to think is that all might be well and good from the surface. And then all of a sudden, bam, you've got 2 or 4 teams from the leftover Big 12 that end up in the Pac-12, and they're saying, okay, we can raise our perception by going and joining the Pac-12 and then, kind of seeing how it goes from there. I could see teams like, Oklahoma State or Texas Tech or something like that. Kansas and the awesome basketball prowess going and partnering up with teams like UCLA. I mean, that has a draw for me on some level.
It makes a lot of sense for the individual teams. The math doesn't line up from a conference perspective, and that's the real shame.
Yeah, I mean, what those guys do is they're going to do whatever they want to do, and all I'm concerned with is at the end of the day, what are we as Conference USA fans going to be left with? Marshall, for example, has been through 2 or 3 different now lineups for Conference USA. Poor Southern Miss has been there from the beginning. They've seen them all, and everybody's come and gone, and here they are still being competitive and doing well and excellent fan support and all this kind of stuff. And they're like the Charlie Brown of the college football world. They get no respect. Anytime they get, ready to kick the ball, Lucy just pulls it right out of the way, and then they end up on their backs again, and it's unfair. Southern Miss is a good team. I'm glad they're around. I'm glad they're still in our conference. It's one I don't want to lose ultimately if realignment does rear its ugly head, but I could see why they would want to continue to be aligned with Louisiana Tech because of their longstanding rivalry. And I've heard from many, many folks that if there was a type of split type thing that, those teams would definitely align themselves with Texas-based schools because they recruit so heavily in Texas. But anyway, realignment is just always fun to talk about. It's just always fun to speculate.
Yeah, and here we were 3 weeks ago, and we'd forgotten about it a little bit. I think it was most interesting that I think Bob Bowlesby said at the end of Big 12 Media Days that this was the first year where he didn't get a realignment question, and he thought that was a good sign.
Yeah, well, I think that's going to be around for. And I mean, 2025 is Texas and Oklahoma will not be in the Big 12 in 2025. Okay, it ain't happening. So you can put that date on it. You can stamp it, slap it, whatever you want to do. They got enough money in the bank to write whatever check they need to write to get out of that because it will be almost recouped way faster once they're in the SEC. But so these things are going to happen sooner than later. They're just not going to happen super soon. But we'll see. There's rumors flying around, and if you look hard enough around some Sunbelt social media stuff, you can see some news, some smoke. And is it just a smoke screen, or is there fire behind that? I'm not trying to break any news here, but there's a thread floating around that allegedly the Sunbelt commissioner was in Huntington a couple of days ago, and people were like, "Oh, okay, what's that all about? Is he just having lunch, or is he, is there some fire behind that?" So, something to at least listen to, I guess. So, this is not from Conference USA fans. This is from Sunbelt fans talking about that. So you can find it on the Twitterverse if you go looking for it. But anyway, Matt, it was excellent to have you on the show. We definitely want to have you back on. Maybe when Western goes to Rice in November, we'll get you back on here if you're down for that, and let you talk about how things are going at that point. We can get a better idea of what the game might look like. But before we get you out of here, I want to give you a chance to say any final thoughts you got, like we always do on our podcast. Anything you want to talk about. It doesn't just have to be, Rice related or Western or Marshall related. Just your opportunity to speak your mind about whatever you got on your mind. And also let everybody know where they can find you and your sites on the interwebs and on social media. And once again, tell them how they can pick up that unbelievably awesome Conference USA preview.
Yeah, that's a couple things. First, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'd love to come back. It's always good to talk some football. Rice didn't play a game last year until October 24th, almost November. So the fact that, we're in August and I can talk about football and not still talking a little bit about COVID, but more football than not football. That's nice. So appreciate that. And then, man, just shout out to the Marshall and Western Kentucky fan bases. One thing I say all the time is that the biggest problem Conference USA has is that it doesn't hate enough. There's not enough passion in fan bases that just like nobody in UTEP is like, man, we just can't wait to go to Boca Raton and just beat those guys. Like nobody, no one cares. And that's the problem. So anytime we can get a Western Kentucky or a Marshall schools that they'll just go out and they'll pick a fight with anybody. I think that's great. It's good for the conference. It's good for whatever brand they have. So thank you on that front, and always a good time. On the Conference USA side and the Rice side, yeah, go ahead and grab that preview. Like you said, Katie, it's been my privilege to get to put it together the past couple years. It's $5. I think it's 88 pages. You get 5 pages on every Conference USA team. I got some Conference USA picks. I went ahead and broke down the top games in conference, and we didn't really talk on this, but Conference USA has some chances to upset some Power 5 teams this year. So I have a article in there, a couple games that you might want to watch that probably won't be streamed on Facebook. So that's good. And yeah, at theroost.com, you can find the links there to the preview at theroost.com/shop. Go find us on social media at The Roost, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever. If you can find Moonshine Throwdown, you'll find us. We're retweeting each other and sharing stories, keeping up the good work. So I think that's about it. But yeah, always a good time, and I guess we'll see what the world looks like come November, right?
Yeah, could be a very different picture of Conference USA as we know it. It's a lot of preseason hype right now, and when the pads start popping and the plays start getting ran, we'll see where the wins and losses iron out. Folks, go to the social media sites, hit follow, go buy the Conference USA preview. I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed. As a matter of fact, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at the amount of information you get for your $5. And I firmly believe if you buy it once, you'll be looking forward to when it's released the next year and the next year and the next year, because it's just that good. We love Phil Steele. We love what he does, but I paid $20 for this book, and I could care less about how well Clemson's going to do. I know they're going to be good. I know Ohio State's going to, I don't care. I buy this book and I go buy it for 10 pages, 14 pages in the back. And you get 5 times that many, 6 times that many with Matt's preview and at theroost.com. I'm going to get us out of here. It's been awesome. I'm glad we got to break this up and get this in. This is kind of a toss it together type idea, and it's been pretty fun. I love talking conference realignment anytime. I'll do that ad nauseum until people are tired of hearing it. I got some great info on the West. I just don't follow it that closely. So thanks for bringing that to our listeners. I'm sure a lot of these Western Kentucky fans are going to be interested in what Rice is doing, especially since they're on the schedule this year. Marshall could probably care less what you're doing because they kind of hate Rice. If they had to pick somebody to hate, it's Rice, because we went this whole episode and didn't gloss over the fact that I got to do this just for them. They stole the Conference USA Championship hosting site in 2013. They know they did. Conference USA's math lied about it. Take it for what it's worth, but that's just for my Herd fans that are listening.
Who won that game, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because the game,
I think that's all that goes down in the record books, not the decimals, right?
They will go to their graves telling you if that game's in Huntington, you get boat raced. That they will go to their grave telling you that. But anyway, that's just for all my Herd listeners I would not let this episode in without getting that in, because all these people are now listening to their radios going, yeah, you're damn right. That game should have been in Huntington. So anyway, appreciate you having you on. We will definitely get you back. But until next time, Steven and I and Trace and I will come back continuing our series of position group breakdowns. The guys still haven't told me what the next group on the docket are. I'm feeling like we're going to round out the offenses, though. So look for probably wide receivers and tight ends, but somebody might switch it up and want to go DB. Until next week, it's the Moonshine Throwdown Podcast. Later.